So there we go. Thank you so much for taking time to join us. We are just having a great time discussing your book and are so thrilled that you're here to talk with us more about it. I read this months ago and I just was so eager for the book to finally be out in the world so that
Yeah.
everybody could get a chance to get their hands on it. And it's been amazing to see how well it's been received and how it's touched people in different ways. And we just couldn't be happier for you.
Oh, thank you so much. It's yeah, who I had no idea that all of this would happen with it. So of course it's just really warmed my heart. I've felt so grateful for the reception that the book has gotten, and so grateful for all of you. Kelly, I've told you this, and Ivana, I've told you both this on Instagram a little bit, but your support and your helping to spread the word about the book, it's meant the world to me. So thank you guys. Thank you all so much, really.
Well,
So
and I told Shelley, I think this morning, I was at a book club last night, and a friend had said that she wanted to go get this book. She went to Barnes and Noble here in the Chicagoland area, and it was sold out. And she's like, I couldn't find it. And I was like, that's amazing.
that's good. Yeah. Yeah, that feels like a good sign.
What a
Uh,
win.
it's been amazing, but yeah, you guys were early fans, and I can't thank you enough. So I'm so grateful to be here. You might have seen that I put on my Instagram story yesterday. I'm like, finally,
Yes.
we get to do this, because I've been looking forward to it for a really long time. So thank you for having me.
Yes, and this was our first event that we made your tour schedule. It was like printed out, and then we were like, "Oh, God, we're on the schedule!" So that
Yes,
was
and
so fun to see.
oh, good, good, good. Yeah, I'm still kind of in the middle of that very long book tour this week. There's a lot going on this week, but I'm super happy to be here. So thank you.
Oh, great. Well, to start us off, let's back way up, way up, maybe like 10 years ago. And
Um,
you can tell us a little bit about how this book got started and your path to publication, because it's not the typical route. And I'd love to
no.
hear more about that.
Yes, well, I did chip away at this book for a really long time, which makes, I think, the success that it is having all that much more sweet. I don't know, to me at least. And I feel like that many of you here will understand that, when you're a working mom, and there are only so many hours in the day, and your needs and desires are not at the top of your priority list, as so many of you fully understand. You kind of find the things that really matter to you outside of parenting and outside of your job. You kind of you grab them little bits here and there whenever you can. And for me, that was writing. And I would say once the character of Victoria, this whole book started for me with the character of Victoria. I love her so much. And like you said, Kelly, I've been living with her for so long, gotten to know her really well. But for whatever reason, that mysterious creative thing of why a character even begins to form in a writer's mind, I think it's a beautiful and mysterious thing. I don't know why, but once she started forming in my mind, I just lived with her for a really long time. And I would just, as ideas of who she is and what her story was, I would just write it down little by little by little, not really giving the story or my creative impulse or my desire to write the attention and time that it deserved. But over time, I collected enough that I thought, oh my goodness, I think this is a novel. And that kind of, I didn't set out to write a novel necessarily. I was just playing with this story and this character. And then once it really started to take hold in me, I knew I needed to finish. And so I got better at clearing space from family life and from work to actually complete a draft and then another one. I'm a big reviser, so I don't even know honestly at this point how many revisions of this book that I've done. Not major revisions. The story has stayed the same, but even once I felt like it was finished, it was never really finished until fairly recently. So I think that in a nutshell, that's kind of my journey with the story, is that once I gave it the attention that it deserved, it's almost like it insisted on being told, that even when I did not have time to work on it, I carved out time, and I'm so grateful that I did.
Yeah, we're grateful for that too. So after you finished the book and finished again and finished again, how did you go about getting it published, and like how did the book end up in our hands?
Yeah, it's such a journey. As a book lover and a book person my entire life, I knew that writing books was difficult, but I didn't really know the whole journey that authors go through, from finishing your draft to publication. That is a journey in and of itself. I've been on this huge learning curve, learning about the publishing world. And it definitely takes time, and it takes a lot of attention, and it takes a lot of luck, and a lot of the benefit of really great people behind you and believing in you. And luckily I had all of those things. And so I took early retirement from my job as a professor at Western Colorado University in 2018. And I think it was right around that time that I was brave enough to send out my first attempt at getting an agent. And luckily for me, that was the quick part. I have a wonderful agent named Sandra Bond, who is in Denver. She's also a generational Coloradoan. And she took on the book right away. She really saw something special in it. And then she started over time. A lot of people, what they don't know about the publishing world is big publishing houses only accept manuscripts in like certain times of year. So once she started looking for just the right publisher, it would go out for a chunk of time, and then, I would work on some revisions and it would go out. And anyway, Sandra, bless her heart, found me the absolute perfect publisher for me, which is Spiegel and Grau. And I signed with them in summer of 2021. And now it's spring of 2023 and it's in the world. So that process is sort of long by necessity. I think it's to make sure that the publishing house is the right fit for the book, as well as then the book can get polished up and put in the world in its best possible form. So, this whole long process of beginning the book until now, it has been a long journey, but I kind of really feel like it was all just perfect. Like the time and the book and myself, we all evolved just right. I have to have just faith that it all worked out just right.
Can I just hop in there? One question though, when I don't mean to backtrack you even further, but what were you? I'm a middle school teacher. I'm not a college professor, but I'm so curious about what you were teaching and what you were doing.
Oh yeah,
You did.
I teach at a small mountain university here in Gunnison County. So actually it's in the book when Victoria finds Greenie and she's kind of wandering the streets of Gunnison and goes into the science department to find a botanist to help her, or she doesn't know really that's what she's doing, but that's my university. That's where I've taught it all for 27 years. And at a small university with 2,000 students, it's it's a high mountain college. You wear many hats, and I'm a bit of an interdisciplinary thinker. And so I actually taught a lot of different things, primarily writing and literary studies and philosophy, but also environmental studies, environmental history, literature and philosophy, and American studies, and an honors program. And I lead study abroad programs. And the thing I'm most proud of, and the thing that I loved the most about being a teacher, was I ran a program for first generation and at-risk students to just really put a safety net under those more vulnerable students and make sure they had all of the cheerleading and the love and the skills that they needed to succeed in college. That was something I did as a professor, and I loved it so much. So yeah, I did a lot of things. You can tell I didn't have time to write a book.
You were popping all over the place. That sounds amazing.
It was great. Yeah, it was great. It was a hard job to walk away from in some ways, but in other ways, I was really ready to be the writer that I set out to be as a young woman. I had no doubt as an undergraduate and a graduate student that I was going to be a writer. That's what I knew since I was 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, always. And so I was awarded a teaching fellowship when I was in my master's program, and I really fell in love with teaching. So I went that route for those years, almost 30 years. But it was really meaningful and empowering for me to come back around to what I intended to do in the first place, which was to be a writer. So I cut that career. I feel like I had a full career teaching because I started very young, and hopefully now I can have round two as a writer.
Amazing. That's just, it worked out just seamlessly. Just
Yeah, I feel like it. Yeah, I feel like it.
Yeah, Mary Ellen in the chat said, I love that it all happened at the right time and how Victoria is echoed in that. And that's so true. Just those parallels of her story and your story are great.
Yeah, I feel like very much as Victoria evolved over that long process of writing the book, I was evolving as well. And I was going through all of the things that all of us face in life, the challenges and the difficulties. I had some very sad and devastating personal losses in my family and an illness. And I kind of feel like a lot of Victoria's story took that turn towards strength and resilience, as my own life had to take that turn towards strength and resilience. And I feel like the novel became much richer for that journey.
Yeah, that was one of my questions. The characters just felt so well developed, and this sense of place like so vivid, and it makes sense that you had said Victoria just was a part of you for so long.
Yeah.
And just with the naturalistic setting and the characters, what was your research process like to just create this story?
Well, I think it was a combination of writing about the place that I really consider my homeland. The fact that the novel is set here in the Gunnison Valley, where I've lived for my entire adult life and knew well ever since I was a child. Some of what might have typically been research for a writer that showed up in the book is just kind of in my bones. It's just sort of in my being. I love this valley with my whole heart and soul, and I spend a lot of time out in the wild landscapes. And certainly the components of the natural world that I describe is just from observing and knowing it for my entire life. And then also the history of the drowning of Iola and the building of Blue Mesa Reservoir and Dam. From living here in the valley for so long, I just know those stories. And some of my colleagues and friends are some of our local historians who are really our valley's story keepers. And I've learned so much from them over time. And then, of course, I needed to do a lot of conventional research as well, making sure I had all the dates and all the circumstances correct around the building of Blue Mesa. I had to do a lot of research on peaches because that was actually something I knew very little about, other than how delicious Western Slope peaches are. I've been eating them my entire life, but I didn't realize how fragile and difficult they are to grow, how most of the successful peach farmers on the Western Slope of Colorado are all generational peach farmers, because it's such a difficult thing to do that you really need to inherit that skill. I interviewed a lot of peach farmers in the Paonia and Hotchkiss and Grand Valley area, and learned a ton about peaches. And so I think, again, one of the benefits of kind of letting this book evolve slowly over time was that I could find the gaps in my own knowledge and then go out and research that bit, and make sure that it got into the story accurately. There's a very tricky thing about telling a fictional story that's set in a real place at a real time with real circumstances, because I wanted to be true and respectful to the actual history, while also being very clear that I was writing a fictional story, and also have that creative license to take Victoria's story wherever it wanted to go. And so it was I found it to be a very tricky balance, actually, those two things functioning at the same time, which is probably true for most historical fiction, I guess. But I had never really had to ponder it as deeply as I had with Go as a River. Yeah. So process. That's what I always tell my writing students. That's all writing is, process.
That's such a good point that you bring up about kind of striking that balance of the creative license of an author and staying true to some historical facts.
Yeah,
Laura,
the people who are displaced from Iola, a lot of them still live, they're older now, but some of them still live in the valley. And it's many still feel very heartbroken about being displaced from Iola. And so I felt a huge responsibility to tell that story as accurately and respectfully and well as I possibly could, while at the same time helping them understand that it's a fictional narrative. So yeah.
That's interesting. I want to circle back to the town in a minute, but Laura has a great question about peaches and that connection. I'd love for her to ask that right now.
So it sounds like a lot of us during our discussion before you hopped on really loved your symbolism with peaches. And for me, Victoria and her peach tree seem to be completely interconnected, constantly giving of themselves, being uprooted, patiently waiting to be rejuvenated. Can you talk a little bit about your use of similes and metaphors throughout this book?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for that, because well, first of all, I should mention, you guys, I haven't said this yet, but this is only, I think, the fourth time ever that I've been able to actually talk about the book. So thank you for that, because I've been out on this book tour, but I'm giving talks and things that are no spoilers. And I have only had this wonderful opportunity to actually dig into things like the symbolism and metaphors and whatnot in the book, like the deeper things that I really pondered and crafted very intentionally in the book. I've really not had much of a chance to talk about that. So thank you for letting me talk about that. And Laura, that's a great question. The peaches, as you mentioned, end up being, they play a wide variety of roles in the book. Catalysts, they're one of the only things that holds that ragged Nash family together. It emphasizes the meaning and the importance of ancestry, and it really ends up being the one thing that Victoria can try at least to reclaim out of all of her losses. And so all of those things. But as you said, I think the idea of resilience and new soil. I also think growing against the odds, the more that you know about how difficult it is to grow peaches in Western Colorado, they're, like I said earlier, the blossoms are incredibly susceptible to frost. They all the way through its growing season. There's so many things that can go wrong with a peach at this elevation and this arid climate. And so the growing against the odds, resilience and new soil, all of those things. I did that very intentionally. And I will say that I was a little bit surprised when Spiegel and Grau chose a peach for the cover of the book. I knew that the peaches played a really essential role to the story in a symbolic and metaphoric way. But of course, with the title goes a river, and obviously the rivers are very symbolic and metaphorical as well. I assumed there would be a river on the cover. And yet I loved seeing that my editor and my publisher saw that the peaches actually were the most special part of the book, and how the role that the peaches play. And that's how we ended up with the peach on the cover, which I was thrilled about. I loved that. And then some of the other symbols and metaphors that run through the book is obviously the rivers, the Gunnison River, the North Fork River, and the Animas River all become almost characters themselves. And the title is really embedded in the idea that I wanted to put forth in the book of that, rivers can be incredibly instructive about how to live our best lives. The idea that rivers collect and nurture along the way. They flow forward against obstacle, up and over and around, and they carve new banks when they must in order to continue to move forward. And, when Will says that to Victoria early on in the book, he says, I'll go as a river. And as you know, she says, I nodded as if I knew what that meant and agreed to meet him the next day. She has no ability at that earlier stage in the book to have the depth or the perception or the wisdom, the sophistication to understand what he means by that. And then the entire rest of the book becomes her trying to understand what it means to go as a river. And so the rivers obviously throughout the book become very symbolic. I'm sure there are so many more, but if I
Oh,
think,
thank you. That was beautiful. And I appreciate you answered because that was another one of my questions was the go as a river. So I kind of got a 2-for-1. So thank you.
yeah, you're so welcome. Thank you for that question.
I need you to come speak to my English class. Symbolism and metaphors. I just talked about that today, and it's hard
Oh,
sometimes for middle school age students to fully comprehend that symbolism, but it's exactly just
yeah.
beautifully said. I'm glad
Well,
we
and
recorded.
bless you for teaching middle school English, because honestly, that is such a beautiful and crucial age for them to fall in love with reading and fall in love with things like, analyzing or feeling literature just kind of in their hearts. And I often spent time as an English teacher sort of helping kids re-fall in love with English class in a way, if they didn't have a good teacher like you, Ivana, who got them excited about it. So thank you for being a good middle school English teacher. I think that is that will change those kids' lives forever. So yay you.
Yeah, you can only hope, right?
Yeah, no, I'm sure. I'm certain of it, actually.
Well, it was really evident throughout the story that you had done your own personal research, but just broader research in general of the time. And for me, I felt like you took great care in writing Will's character specifically. And I saw in another interview that you mentioned that it was important for you that the Native people be represented, but then also that you weren't trying to own their narrative. And
Yeah.
I can imagine that would be a really tough line to walk. I'd love for you to talk more about this and just what went into Will's character specifically and any additional research and thought process that was behind it, because I know there was.
Yeah, there really was. So thank you for that question, Kelly, because I actually really I like talking about the process of writing Will's character, because it was hands down the most difficult and carefully constructed part of this entire book. And I think because I went into it so cognizant of the history, so cognizant of the the appropriation of Indigenous people's stories, so aware of the horrific treatment. And so I knew that I couldn't write a story about displacement in the Gunnison Valley or in the American West at all without including, to the best of my ability, the Indigenous experience. But like you said, Kelly, I also felt like Will's story wasn't entirely my story to tell. And so, yeah, it was a very tricky balance for me of including, I really think of Will and Victoria as two sort of parallel figures of displacement. And I also knew that because of prejudice in our society, because of the way that history informed both of their experiences, I knew that the displacement that they were experiencing couldn't play out the same for both of them. I had to, I wanted to not shy away from the horrors of prejudice and racism and the legacy of that. I make Will a drifter from the beginning because he is the product of generational displacement. And so he becomes someone that we learn right away in the book is kind of a child of nowhere. He who ancestrally would have been incredibly rooted in the land because of the displacement of Indigenous people and the relocation on reservation systems. And then Will is a character who, I don't go too far into it, but I do allude to it. Will was then one of those children that were essentially stolen from the reservation and placed in those horrific Indian boarding schools that were really indoctrination programs to try to take young Native children and turn them into sort of good little white kids. And they were really horrific. They weren't schools at all, but they were really horrific institutions. And shockingly, the last Indian boarding school in the West didn't close until 1977. There's this painful legacy where it wasn't uncommon for a child coming out of one of those schools to kind of not belong anymore in either culture. And so I wanted Will to be that symbol of displacement and to not shy away from the legacy of the pain of that prejudice. And I I tried to write him primarily through Victoria's lens, right? I felt like I wanted to tell his story, but his full story wasn't mine to tell. But what I felt that I could do is tell Will's story through Victoria's lens. And through Victoria's lens, we come to know Wilson Moon as the just lovely young man that he is. And in fact, for me, the most powerful part about the love story between Will and Victoria is that I, as a counterbalance to the racism and prejudice that we see in the book, I wanted Will and Victoria to show what we are what we are capable of as human beings. Two young people who just come together, human heart to human heart, and they just see one another as human beings completely transcendent of those cultural biases and prejudices, because I do think that we are capable of doing that. And so, you know, that's sort of how I wanted Wilson Moon's story to play out. And like I said, I didn't want to shy away from the horrors of the prejudice of the time. And I wanted Will to remain with Victoria and in her heart throughout the novel. And so, yeah, I love Wilson Moon so much. I love that character. I love that young man. And I hope that all of my intentions for him came through in the book, in the way in which he was represented.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for that answer. That was really thought-provoking. And I read in another interview too that you had spent a lot of time with Indigenous people. Was that throughout your career or in preparation for the book? How did that play out?
Yeah, no, it was just my life. I was raised, my lovely mom and dad raised me to have a tremendous amount of respect for Indigenous cultures. And so in a variety of capacities, I've spent time on the Cheyenne River Lakota Reservation and Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota, and also several First Nation communities in the Four Corners region, just to do volunteer work, to help out however I could, but mostly to just experience the sacredness of that culture and to learn as much as I possibly could. And I often taught Native American reality structures and history in my environmental philosophy classes to try to bring to my students a different way of thinking about the land and thinking about time and about the earth. And so I felt that it was really important in doing so to learn as much as I could by immersing myself in those cultures. So it was an incredible honor to do so. And I will continue to do so because I love it. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that too. One of the quotes from the book that I loved is, it says, we are one and all alike, if for no other reason than the excruciating and beautiful way we grow piece by unpredictable piece, falling, pushing from the debris, rising again, and hoping for the best. And you had mentioned the Indigenous worldview of cyclical time.
Yeah.
Would you talk more about that and the way that it has manifested in Victoria's life or even your own?
Yeah. Thank you for that question. I love that line. Actually, I feel like a lot of the novel culminates in that cathartic moment where, I'm sure you all noticed that I write Victoria's growth sort of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, right? Where you just think, okay, she's gathered herself up, she's going to be okay, and then she stumbles again. And the reason I wrote her that way was because I think that that's more realistic to how all of us grow. I don't believe in the myth that you conquer one challenge in your life and suddenly you're just like bomber and you can take on everything. I understand from experience is that for me in my own life, you learn and you gather your wisdom and you try to apply it, but you don't always do it successfully. And I think all of growth is 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And so that's kind of what that's referring to. I learned a lot about that by studying the natural world, the layers and layers of life and death, and that it's all there. And, the way in which I think that contributes to, or that also speaks to the cyclical nature of time and Native American reality structures, is that I think that, linear progression in so many ways, a belief in linear progression can really can really lead us astray. Whether it's more beneficial to understand that life is no point, getting from point A to point B is not a direct line, or there's a lot of themes of becoming in my book. And one of the things I've always really loved about conventional and traditional Native American reality structures is that for many Indigenous languages, there's no past tense at all. There are no past tense verbs, because of the concept of life is in a constant state of becoming. So it goes beyond cyclical to the idea that nothing ever is over or done or past, because it's all right here, right now, and that we and all of existence is in a constant state of becoming. I love that. I also feel like it's very generous to our journeys. And so, between those two ideas, I didn't want Victoria's story or the way that things play out for Will. I didn't want them to be point A to point B. I wanted it to be more messy in a way, because I think that that's more realistic to the way that all existence actually occurs.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I wish I could be a student in one of your classes just to hear more about all of these ideas, and that's wonderful.
Well, I think it's really beneficial to students to understand that different cultures have different reality structures. Some of the things that we think of as
It's not
absolutely
a book.
to what is real, a different culture would say, well, that's not real.
Yeah.
And I think just that in of itself expands a student's mind to help them see the world more broadly. So thank you for that.
Okay. Hey, Liz, you might have accidentally unmuted.
Oh, sorry. My daughter was like, "Are you actually listening?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm writing down things." I just think I thought the same thing, that you sound like a great professor. There she is.
Oh, thank you. Oh, thank you. Thank you. It's really putting ideas out for students and then letting them play with them and decide and chat and throw them back at you. That is what I miss about being in the classroom. I really do.
Okay, Mary Ellen, would you like to ask your question and have Shelley delve deeper into that?
Hi, Shelley. I had some questions about the title, and you answered a lot of them. But when I read it a second time for this this chat, I was struck by how much the going as a river is a picture of our lives overcoming obstacles and making a way around and through. And I even thought about, like, when you watch water hit an obstacle, it kind of like works at it, and then
Yeah.
eventually it breaks through, and that picture. But I also thought about what dams do when we in our life, and I wondered if you had intentionally had that symbolism of the dam that they did on the Gunnison River to drown Iola and the other cities. Was that something that you were thinking about too?
Yes. Thank you for that, because, like I said earlier, this story all began with the character of Victoria, the story of Iola and the displacement of the people from Iola, the flooding of the Gunnison River Valley, and the creation of Blue Mesa Reservoir. Was a setting and a time period that I chose to place Victoria in. And so I had that background already about Blue Mesa Reservoir. It's just, 30 miles down the road from me. It's the largest reservoir in Colorado. Here in our valley, it's where everybody swims. I mean, it's ice cold, but we're used to that here. It's where we swim in the summer and fish and boat and ice skate in the winter. To someone who doesn't know the history, it's just this very beautiful lake. But ever since I was a child, I knew there were towns down there. I knew there were towns at the bottom of Blue Mesa Reservoir, and that had always really captured my imagination, and also sort of haunted. I found it a little haunting. And so when I was deciding on the setting for this book, it seemed a natural fit to place Victoria and Iola, not only for the displacement factor, but for exactly what you're saying, the river becoming symbolic of growth and our ability to overcome, being dammed. The Gunnison River is at the headwaters of the Colorado River, and it is a crucial river for this ecosystem. And the fact that the water policy at the time, which is based on almost 100-year-old doctrine, 100-year-old policy called the Colorado River Compact, it's a compact of 7 states, contributed to the I was going to say the wisdom at the time to create this dam. And, there are benefits as well as there are detriments, but the idea that an essential river to this ecosystem could be dammed, that a valley that was inhabited by, generational farmers could be flooded, essentially erased from the map, erased from the earth, in order to create this dam. That is a bold move, right? To dam a river. And what does that mean long term to this idea, this symbolic, metaphorical notion of the river that can push through obstacle? I recently read something about Glen Canyon Dam and the dam at the end of Lake Powell, and an environmental writer named Edward Abbey predicted that that dam is not going to exist 50 years from now, and he said that about 45 years ago, and now we're finding. So there's a sentiment here in the valley that the Gunnison River is going to far outlast Blue Mesa Dam, and again, depending on one's perspective, maybe the dam and the reservoir and everything that it brought was positive, or whether it was negative, I don't know. But in terms of the symbolism of the river and the symbolism of the dam, the river is going to last a lot longer than the dam. And so I think in that way, that kind of enhances the metaphor of the river in my book, and one of the reasons I set the novel where I did.
I love it. It spoke to me so much. I mean, I loved it the first time, but the second time I just got so much even more out of it.
Thank you. Thank you for reading it twice. Yay. It's wonderful. Thank you for that question.
Yeah.
Well, in our group chat prior to this discussion, we just had a chat going on Instagram. It was so fun to see all of the people across the country who had said, oh, I grew up near, a previous town that had been flooded, because of something similar. And it was something for me that I had never heard of, but it was interesting to see all of the people that were commenting like, oh, this happened near me too.
I had no idea what a common story it is until I started, because for us, it's very visceral here in our valley. And because we know people who were actually displaced from Iola. Once I started doing the research, I learned a few other places as a result of the Colorado River Compact, primarily in the 1950s and 60s, that suffered similar fates as Iola. But since I've been out on the road on this book tour, I cannot tell you how many people have come up to me after, when it's time for book signing, and said, this happened to my homeland, this place or that place. It's remarkable. I've started writing them all down. Not too long ago, I was in Durango, right on the edge of the Animas River, which is in the book. And there's a reservoir there called Navajo Reservoir, where my family, we go down and go fishing on the fly fishing on the lower San Juan River right there. I never knew that multiple communities had been displaced for that dam. I was folding laundry at a little hotel in Moab when I was there on my book tour, and I struck up a conversation with a man who was from South Korea, and he told me, oh, that exact same thing happened in my valley in South Korea, a dam that displaced several towns. And I've gotten that report from several people in Europe as well. And so I'm gathering those stories because I'm loving learning more about that type of experience in other places. So.
Yeah, Mary Ellen wrote, you wonder how much damage has been done from all these dams and what the consequences have been.
Yeah, and like I said, there are pluses and negatives. It's an water policy, particularly in the West, incredibly complicated. And so I'm sure there were benefits, and I know there were detriments, if for no other reason for the heartbreak that it caused and the ecological destruction that it caused. In subtle ways, I have Victoria question the notion of progress. The removal of the indigenous people was all in the name of progress. The building of the dam and the creation of Blue Mesa Reservoir was all in the name of progress. It's a very tricky and difficult word and concept to unpack. And yet I think that we all benefit from questioning what we're kind of packaged and sold as progress, and to really evaluate and analyze that term and that idea, not to say that it's always incorrect, but to at least bring our critical thinking skills to that and ask questions, not just assume that if it's sold to us as progress, that it really is. And I think Victoria at one point says, I question the limits of progress, and I wondered when we would know when we hit them. I think she says that at one point. And I didn't want to be too overt or didactic with it. I just wanted to put that out there and then, let readers make up their own mind.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Shelley. Wendy, I'm going to kick it to you because we're talking about the river specifically. So she's got a comment about the location and a question about the flooding of the town.
Okay.
Well, I just wanted to say, I actually lived in Pagosa Springs for years when I was young. So when I heard where this book was set, I was drawn to it. And then to see all the little towns that I went to, I had a friend that lived in Montrose who went there quite often, Durango, the Silverton Ouray train, all those different, Gunnison. My dad was actually in the Forest Service. So we lived in Pagosa. And so my other question about, and I love Colorado, and I'm in Tennessee now and haven't been back for a long time. So this made me a little homesick for Colorado.
Yeah.
But my question about the flooding of the town, did you purposefully not put a lot of details about what actually happened when the water came and flooded the area? I love literary fiction books, but I also love like disaster books. And so I was curious, and I loved the way it was done. And I felt at the end that maybe it was really appropriate and you had a purpose for that, to just kind of mention that, but not really have the details about what actually happened when the water came and basically covered the area in the flood.
Yeah, a tricky thing about writing from a first person narrative perspective. Every author, when they sit down to tell a story, they have to choose, what point of view, how's this narrative perspective going to play out? And for me, the first person narration of Victoria Nash, to get inside her and to write this in first person, came very naturally. But the repercussions of that are that I, as an author, am limited in what I can say. I can only know, you as a reader can only know what she knows. And so and then again, as I said earlier, my greatest goal with this book was to just tell Victoria Nash's story as precisely and as well and with as much heart and soul as I possibly could, out of respect for her and my love for her. And so, once Victoria gathers herself up and makes this bold move of leaving Iola, being the first one to sell out, figuring out how to move the trees, going over to the North Fork Valley with such courage and trying to start a new life, she removed herself as much as possible from what was actually then going on in Iola. So much so that some of the details, she sees, I remember when she's sitting in the cafe. I was just at that cafe, by the way. I was giving an author event in Paonia, and I went to that same cafe where I have Zelda and Victoria meet for coffee. And Victoria looks over and sees the farmer, the rancher, looking at a newspaper, and it has the headlines about the final evacuation from Iola. I did it that way because I think it was very important for Victoria to remove herself as much as possible. Once she left Iola, she chose not to go back until that one scene that we have when she tries to go back and she can't get in. I wanted her to not know the details. And even though I know the details, I didn't put them in to be true to Victoria's point of view. And I think that would be my answer to that. And again, there's a lot of parts of the book that are very tricky, where Shelley, knew way more than Victoria possibly could know about one thing or another. And I had to be very disciplined and make sure that I only was able to put in there what she would actually know, and also what mattered to the story, and leave out what did not matter. Did that answer your question? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point about the perspectives and the narrative, like who it's coming from.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't have thought of that.
First person narration is much more intimate. I think you all ended up knowing Victoria much more intimately. I think it can be a lot more visceral, but it is very limited in what you can and cannot include in a narrative. And so it's it's a tricky aspect of craft that probably is why I chose to do so many revisions on this book, because I had to then get that just right,
Exactly. Well, you nailed it.
Thank you.
Melody.
Yeah, Melody has a question.
Yeah. Hi, Shelley.
Sorry, I
so-
met Melody and I met Melody. So like saying,
Yeah.
Nice to see you.
I'm sorry, I'm getting a phone call. I'm like, how do I send it to voicemail? There we go. A comment and then a question. First of all, I love that it's like we can do all the spoilers here, because it kind of killed me at the King's English, where I'm like, oh my gosh, this is I want to know. First of all, I felt like you indulged the reader by giving us Inga's letters or story about what happened with Victoria's son. And I so appreciated that story, because I think some authors wouldn't have been so nice to us. So that I just cried during like all of that story. So I really appreciated that. But the second question, I was so, well, why did you never have Victoria have another love interest? I know that you've said that she just kept Will Moon in her heart and whatnot. But the question is, so not in this story, does she meet someone else in the future, in the next 20 years? Like, I'm curious why you chose not to have a love interest, and does she?
Okay, awesome question. Very fair question. Very fair question. Well, thank you, first of all, for saying that the way in which I included Inga's story and what happened to Lucas, that worked for you, because trust me, as part of those revision process, I played structurally with that story so many different ways. And I knew it was important to help the reader understand, this other mother, who is this other mother? She plays a large enough role in the story and also in Victoria's mind and imagination. Who is she? I wanted you to know that, but also what happened to the baby. I played structurally with where to place it. And ultimately I decided I would try to put it where, as Victoria's desire to know what happened to her baby grows, the reader's desire to know grows as well. And then to place that answer where I placed it. So it was really hard. And so I really appreciate that worked for you. But in terms of a love interest for Victoria, as all of you know, she's a relatively, or maybe a very solitary character. Even when she's living in that house full of men, being the only female in this house full of difficult men. And Victoria is a worker. The ranchers and farmers that I know here in my valley and from my own ancestry, I know that work ethic didn't leave a lot of time for relationship outside of the farm, outside of the work. And so for some people, for others, it does if they insist upon it, but Victoria is not one who insisted upon it. And so really, when Zelda comes into the picture, I talk about that Zelda is really her first friend of her life other than her trees. And I needed to maintain that kind of solitary aspect of Victoria's character in order for her to really dig down and heal and become what she needs to become. And I also wanted to turn her toward female friendship, because as important as another love interest might be in her life within the context of the story that I wrote, I wanted to turn her toward another human being in her healing from Will. but I wanted it to be a female friendship because I thought that was a very, very important thing for her. In terms of what happens after, I should ask you guys. You know, I'm glad you think that bringing in Inga's narrative was generous of me to the reader, because sometimes I want to apologize to the reader, first of all, for what happened to Will, although like I said, I wanted to be as authentic with that and not shy away from the horrors of prejudice, but also where I ended the book. I sometimes want to apologize to people for that, because I feel like I knew that's where I wanted to end it. And but I know for some people they're like, what? Well, what happens next? You know, and I want to leave that up to you to pursue, I guess, in your own imagination. But what I hope I've given you is that there's been a lot of healing, but also a lot of laying bare the messiness of being human and the complexity of being human and the difficulty of being human. So whereas, you know, Victoria has healed a lot, my answer is yes. I think she will turn toward love again. And yes, I think that she and Lucas and Inga and Zelda will continue to live their best lives within the complexity and the messiness of just being human. And I think that Lucas is now on a path. For me, the fact that Lucas showed up, you know, as a child with a broken heart, as a child of adoption, as a young man of war, as someone who feels alienated by the fact that his mother left him, the fact that he showed up for me was all the hope that I wanted to turn the novel toward hope, but I wanted to leave you with a lot of possibilities for Lucas, and it's not going to be easy for him, but I think there's a lot of courage in the fact that he showed up, a lot of courage in the fact that Victoria showed up at the end. And so I think that both of them will carry that forward. And yes, I do think that should end up in a love interest for Victoria. If I can be so bold as to say, I really shouldn't say that. I should leave it up to you guys when I say that, but I think so. I'd like that to be true.
I have to say, I was at the edge of my seat at the end. I was just like, is he going to get into an accident on the way? Is this all going to get ruined? I just had all these thoughts of how it's like not going to meet up. So when they actually like did, I mean, talk about like a cry sob fest. It was just enough to leave us like so happy and so moved. You know, it was like, I thought the perfect way to stop, you know, give us that. Yeah.
With all of my revisions, I didn't ever change that ending. I changed some of the structure leading up to that ending, but I knew for a long time that's exactly where I wanted to leave it. And I also really, I like that when Victoria first lays eyes on him, first she thinks, you know, he looks just like Will. And so it's a way to bring Will back into the narrative to be very present for Victoria, as he always is. But then she sees him as that baby that she looked in his eyes. And, you know, any of you who are mothers, you feel like you would recognize your baby. You feel like you would recognize your child, you know, decades later. But also then the third, she sees him as himself. She said, but I also see him as himself. And that's a lot of growth, I think, too, that he goes from being this lost baby to being this young man who's actually standing in front of her. And what is that new love going to look like? I wanted to just leave it right there and then leave it up to them to figure it out, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so much in the chat about how much we love the ending. Laura Beth
good.
says, I'm glad it didn't end with her focused on a man, but instead on her son and the possibilities of their family. And then Liz said she falls madly for her son and finds a nice fella too who makes peach pies.
Yeah, I like that one.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when I very first started out writing this book, Victoria in mind at first, and then eventually Inga, and then another character that I ended up getting rid of, but some of her qualities are in Zelda. I really started this book pondering more deeply, what does it mean to be a woman in the world? Mm-hmm. For me, that has been very much defined by motherhood and mothering, by being mothered by a very dedicated mother and by being very dedicated mothering my children. And so I know that motherhood can play a wide variety of roles in people's lives. You know, Inga is a character who never wanted to be a mother. And I have plenty of people in my life who have made that choice and yet from biological determinisms and also her era, she's forced to be one. And yet she eventually steps into that. She said, I had to choose. It was either motherhood or madness. But I really, I think I turned Victoria toward female friendship at the end of the book, primarily because of that concern that I had from the very beginning of this book, is I wanted to tap into something very essential about being a woman in the world. And I think turning toward other women for support and guidance and I don't know, just some sort of depth of connection ended up really being important to me in the book.
I love that.
I was just going to say that really resonates with me, and it made it not cliche. Like, I feel like, so many books try to please us by them finally getting together. So I appreciated like the realness of life. So
yeah, thank you for that. And I have gotten that feedback from a few readers, and it was funny because people thought when the professor comes in, like, oh, maybe she's going to fall in love with Greenie. And then when the realtor pops up before we know he's married, like, oh, maybe this is the guy, and I just wanted to not go there. Yeah, for those reasons that I said. So thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Well, our time is almost up, but I feel like Rebecca has the perfect last question for us. I'd love for you to be able to ask that.
Hi. Well, I did propose a question in our chat. I basically had said, because you have grown up and lived there your whole life, I asked about the favorite passage. Now I see you don't have the book in front of you, and I don't expect you to read. I did see okay, thank you. I did see an interview with you reading a passage, and I thought you did it such good justice. Now I read an advanced e-copy. I did not do the audio, so to hear it in your words. My question was, and I'm going to give this kind of a quick two-part, is that you've already gone through, I think, the first 3/4 of this discussion of the landscape. So my question had been, what was your favorite passage in the book? And we've spent so much time talking about the landscape that was my thought. But now that I've heard a couple of these other questions, I'm wondering, we didn't touch anything on, I'm a mom who couldn't get an epidural, and that guttural giving birth story. And then also the symbolic leaving the rocks for the other mother, or excuse me, the peaches, but the son leaving the rocks. So is there a favorite passage that you have in all of these? I mean, there's such a huge umbrella of beauty. I told the girls beforehand that for me, I consider like the first 25% of the story, and then it just bloomed into so much. So I thought, how could she have a favorite? But with you being from there, do you?
Oh, that is such a great question. Well, there are definitely certain parts in this book that when I read, I still cry. And like I said, I've revised this over and over. I have read it and reread it 1,000 times. Honestly, if you ask me any place in this book, where's that place? I could be like, oh, it's right here. Like, I know I just have lived with it and loved it for so long and contemplated this story so deeply that it just all resides inside of me. And when I do reread it, there are parts where I still cry. And so one of those parts for me, the giving birth, my goodness, when I tapped into my own birth experience in order to tell that story. And what I remember most clearly about giving birth to my children is that I felt this incredible connection to every single female throughout, animal or human, throughout all of history, who also did the same thing. I tapped into this eternal, sacred act of bringing life into the world in order to get through my own birth experiences. And so, I tried to channel all of that into Victoria. And so I will say, as I was writing all that, I sobbed while I was writing it. And so there's still part of me that cries when I read it. Also the inevitability of it, when she says that, she felt like she was on a wild horse and she had no choice but to ride it until she was thrown. Anyway, I imagine there's a lot in there that feels sort of universal to any mother who has given birth. And like I said, there are many, many, many ways to be a mother. There are many, many ways to be a woman in the world. It doesn't require on any level knowing that experience. But for me, it was a very profound experience. The other thing that I'll point to as one of my favorite passages. Remember when Victoria first goes out into the wilderness and she rides the horse Abel out of Iola, and she looks down on her valley and then she keeps on going. She doesn't really know where she's going. She's going to try to find that hut. She just has to get away from home because she's pregnant and she's afraid of her brother. But she's riding Abel, the horse, and at one point she gets off and she starts throwing rocks at him to make him go away. And she has that.
I sobbed.
Oh.
I sobbed.
It is so incongruent to who she is. And she says then, you can be a good horse. You can be a good girl. You can be a good horse. You can do everything right, but don't expect right to come to you. And just in that moment, the despair and the sadness for her to be so desperate that she would hurt this animal that she loves.
Mm-hmm.
And then she falls backwards and she's like, I cannot do it. And then she realizes that it's Tori, it's the child Tori who cannot do it, but the woman Victoria who will love, she can know through her relationship with Will, she was the one who had the ability to stand up and go forward. I still cry when I read that section, and her saying, I, Victoria, and claiming that name and claiming that adulthood and that power and that strength in that moment, I think probably is, well, certainly one of my favorite places in the book.
Thank you. That was my, that whole woods scene, and just, oh my God, it brought me back to Old Yeller, everything, but just, it's so sad and it's so blossoming though. I mean, that's where it really opened up for me. And so it's kind of fun to see that that's one of your favorite parts too.
It really is. And then what ensues after that of her time in the wilderness was the easiest part for me to write, because I'm so connected to wild landscapes and wilderness. And I really love that section as well. So I don't know. Yeah, thank you for that question. Really lovely.
Well, will wrap it up here. I feel like there's just so much more that we could chat about. I think this is just the perfect book club book because it's so layered and there's so many things to unpack. And we're just so thankful for the time that you gave us and the opportunity to hear from you, and just makes
it went by so quickly. I could honestly talk with you guys all night long.
I know, but we're just so thankful for the time that you took to get this book in the world and for persevering and sticking with it all of these years, because it's so special. And it's been amazing to see the reception that it's gotten. And we just thank you for touching our hearts with your words. And okay, actually, I lied. Before we sign off, are you able to share anything about what's next for you?
Oh, in terms of what I'm writing now?
Yeah, or just in general. That's fine too, but all the things.
All the things. Well, I'll be brief. I leave next week and this week I'm in Indiana, and then I'm at the Los Angeles Times Festival of Books, which is so cool. Then I leave right after that for a 6-week European book tour, actually. So I'm on the road doing that for a while. And then when I come back, I hope that I can clear some space to move forward on a second novel that I'm writing. Well, in theory, I'm writing. I'm so, committed and wrapped up in the book touring with this book and talking so deeply about this book that I'm just getting to know these new characters, and that is, I've learned where I begin is in character and in place. And so I am working on a second novel that will also be set in Colorado, but a very different part of Colorado, southeastern area where my ancestors homesteaded. And I have high hopes for this process of writing this next novel, of being much more sane and more and quicker, I guess. I don't want to chip away at another book for 10 years, but I've cleared space. I will clear space for it. And I'm so excited to delve into a new story. I actually haven't even been able to conceive of it for a while because I've been so deeply engaged in this one. But yeah, I'm inspired to start writing again. So yeah, I don't know when I'll have it in your hands, but someday, I guess.
Yeah, we look forward to it. Well, before you go, if we could take a quick picture. Ivana, are you?
I'm all ready. You can
Okay.
grab.
Yeah, I'm gonna take one also. Do you, for anybody you?
Yeah, and I can send it to you, Shelley, too. I'll do like a screenshot, but yes, do your own picture too here. I'm just gonna set us up for 1 sec.
Okay, all right, here I am.
Okay, hold on.
Oh, I love these pictures. Thank you, everyone. That's just beautiful to me. I love seeing this. Wow.
Okay, ready? 1, 2, smile. Okay.
Oh, wow.
Fine.
What a dream to get to be with you all tonight. Thank you so much for reading and talking about and loving and supporting my book. I just can never tell you how grateful I am to all of you. So blessings. Thank you.
Thank you, Shelley. Enjoy Europe.
Yeah, we can't wait to see pictures.
Yeah, I'll post some pictures. All right. Thank you all so much.
Yeah,
Thanks for
bye-bye.
everything.
All
Goodbye.
right. Okay, bye-bye. Thank you.